Hello and welcome to the second episode of Pubtalks. Tonight we'll be chatting with Gary Stevenson, a former trader turned wealth economist. I'm Susanna Stokes and I will be your host. So just while we wait for the final few people to log in and get themselves comfortable, I just want to say a really quick thank you to everyone that's taken the time to join us tonight. I know that some of you are actually joining us for the second time, so it's good to know I didn't put you off, and welcome back. For those of you that are listening at a later date, please just bear in mind that these are live recordings of the pub talks and therefore they may not be as slick as your average podcast. In true pub fashion, all the stories shared in these talks are from friends or friends of friends. And tonight we have Gary Stevenson, who is a former trader turned wealth economist, sharing his story with us. As usual, we really encourage questions and dialogue from the audience. We just ask that you let Gary speak and ask your questions at the end. If you've got any burning questions or you're too shy to ask them yourself, then please just pop them in the chat box and I'll do the deed for you. So, Gary, tonight you are joining us from the bright lights of Bow, which is not too far from where you grew up in Ilford, where your story begins. Now, personally, I'm from Nottingham, so I'm not familiar with these parts, and I would love to hear a little bit more about what life was like growing up in Ilford and how you came to be at LSE, where your story begins.
Thank you very much, Zeus. So like I say, I come from a place called Ilford. It's not so well known. It's a suburb out in East London, a little bit past Stratford, where the Olympics were, if you know where that is. I grew up in a little terraced house next to the railway tracks. My dad worked for the post office. My mum was a stay-at-home mum. Ilford is a super multicultural area, especially the area I grew up in. The schools that I went to, it was mostly Pakistani kids, Indian kids, Bangladeshi kids, a lot of people from all over, really. So I grew up in that sort of crowd. I wasn't really too much of a hard-working kid at school. I was a bit of a class clown, really. But always from a very young age, I was very good at maths. And ultimately, it was sort of that led me into banking in the long run. When I was 11, I passed 11 plus and I went to the grammar school, which is out in the sort of towards the leafier end of Ilford, which is a bit nicer than where I grew up. And probably it was only really when I went to that grammar school that I realized that I was poor, basically. I don't think it was such a big deal when I was in primary school. But yeah, there was a lot of people from comfortable backgrounds and I was a lot poorer than the people around me. But I did well there and I made a lot of friends and I did pretty well in my exams. As I got into my teenage years, I did start to get into a bit of a bad crowd. I got into a bit of trouble. I did actually eventually get kicked out of that school when I was 16. And that was probably a bit of a kick up the arse for me because up until then, I was kind of coasting really through school. I wasn't really studying hard, but I was doing quite well in my exams. And after that, basically, I had to study for my GCSEs at home alone, like lying on the floor in the front room, basically. And I realised that if you want to make something of yourself, you're going to have to put a bit more work in. From then I was a little bit more committed. And really, I owe a lot really to the Indian community I grew up in, really, because a lot of my friends and their families, they had a lot of understanding, really, of what you need to do if you want to get into these very well-paid jobs. What kind of A-levels you need to take, what kind of universities you have to apply for. I got a lot of information from them that otherwise I wouldn't have really known about. So those guys advised me what I should do, what kind of unis I should apply for. LSE, London School of Economics, was way at the top of their list. I had to go to the local comprehensive again with some kids from my primary school for A-levels. They thought that was really funny. That was fine. I did well in my A-levels and I was able to get into London School of Economics, which is basically breeding ground for the City of Finance in London. And that was the start of me going into that. In terms of subject, I was always very good at maths growing up. So I studied maths and economics at university. Yeah, maths was a big thing really throughout my whole childhood. It was a very sort of natural talent of mine, really. I studied economics for GCSE from 14 till 16. I quite liked it. I actually applied for some universities maths and some maths and economics because I wasn't too sure. I suppose as a child, I'm from quite a poor background, and I was always quite interested in making money. Somewhat I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder, I guess, growing up. So obviously economics has a perception. If you go into it, you can make good money. So yeah, I applied for some maths and economics.
And then you left LSE, and I suppose that's when all the fun began. So I think why did you choose trading as your sort of next step, or your first step into a professional career?
To be honest, it's quite similar really to how I chose LSE. I think really as a kid from a sort of ordinary background, it's difficult to know sort of what university to go, what job to apply for. LSE, when I was there 2005 to 2008. I guess it's still the same. A lot of people in that university are trying to get into finance. Loads of people are trying to get into finance. So I remember after my first year, I came back in my second year, and just suddenly everybody was talking, using all these 3-letter acronyms, ABS and CDS and CDOs, and talking about sales and trading and IBD and all this random stuff from investment bank, all this investment banking talk, which just meant absolutely nothing to me. If anyone's been to LSE recently, I would guess it's still the same. People are obsessed with getting into finance, basically. I really had no idea what was going on. I was just sort of I was quite intimidated, to be honest. Everybody suddenly knew what jobs they were applying for. People at LSE would apply for like 30 investment banks. I didn't even know there were 30 investment banks, but people would be applying for that many. I sort of just thought, I'm just going to leave this because I've got no idea how to get a good job in it. So I just thought I'd focus on basically doing my maths and economics, trying to do well in that, get good grades. I was kind of hoping to get a job through that. And then in my second year, I got approached by someone in the year above. And I think I must have developed a bit of reputation for being quite good at the maths, basically. And Citi Bank was doing this thing where they pay former interns to like find new hires. And this guy came to me and he said, look, Citi Bank hire one trader a year through a card game, which is basically a maths game, is what he said to me. And when I heard that, it was a little bit like, because I used to do a lot of math competitions as like all my childhood, basically. And to be honest, I would quite often win them. Like, I was quite good at, like, if you give me a math game, I'll probably figure it out quite quickly. So when he told me like, you could play a math game and you can win the job, I was like, I'll go for this. So I just applied for this competition, and I won the LSE round of the competition. I got through to the final, which was a few unis from across the UK. And then I just spent like 2 weeks just like playing this stupid math game, like just memorizing it. I was making spreadsheets for it. And then by the final, yeah, I won the final and I got this job. So I didn't really know what I was doing, to be honest. I just played the little card game and suddenly got a job as a trader. From that, I got an internship. I got a winter internship and a spring internship, and that turned into a summer internship. And yeah, that's how I got the job, really. So it was, to be honest, it was a little bit by accident, really. I hadn't really sort of planned it.
I think I'm going to need a little bit more about this card game. I mean, the only games I've played are Uno, so you know, what sets you apart from your peers at Citi Bank? You know, what is this card game that they gave you? What did it look like?
It's supposed to be like a trading game. The idea is like there's a set of cards which all the cards have different numbers on them. Some are high, some are low. Everybody gets a card, and there's some cards in the middle, and you're supposed to trade with each other about what the total of the cards is. So I've got a high card, so I know it's high, and the numbers that turn over are high, and people reveal information about their cards by the prices they make. So we buy and sell from each other based on what we think the total of the cards is. It's supposed to be a trading game, but I just treated it solely as a maths game, basically. And I just memorized a lot of the statistics about it and the expected values of it. And I think most of the people who were there, to be honest, they were there to network. They hadn't really... I think they hadn't bet they'd win the game, whereas I'm still not very good at networking. But I was good at maths, so I figured, well, I'll just have a crack, see if I win the game, and I won the game. Yeah. it's a maths game, really.
Okay, and then so then you join the trading team, and what sort of so where do they put you? Where do they place you in terms of the trading team and the floor, etc.?
So I won that competition, and I got like pretty much randomly selected 2 1-week internships from that. One was on the credit trading team. These guys trade corporate bonds, which is basically loans to companies. To be honest, that never really excited me too much. And the next one was on short-term interest rates trading. So that was where I ended up full-time. That one seemed more interesting. It was a good team. People seemed a little bit more down to earth. The products we were trading were a little bit more easily accessible. So we're trading currencies, which is something a lot of people understand, obviously, currency trading, buying and selling different currencies, and also loans. For the interest rate side, we're basically focusing on central banks, which is a big thing that we looked at when I studied economics at university, trying to understand. Basically, the idea is the central bank is supposed to adjust the interest rate in response to how strong the economy is. So if the economy is weak, the idea is they cut the interest rate. That's going to incentivize people to borrow and spend, and it's going to boost the economy. If the economy is getting too hot and there's too much inflation, they are supposed to raise the interest rate, and that's supposed to slow the economy down. So for me, that was it was interesting because I was interested in macroeconomics, basically how the economy of countries work, the economy of the world works. So yeah, I went with that. But, to be honest, more than anything, I just felt that the team seemed all right. I had a good vibe from them, so I thought, let's just go with it. They seemed like they were making decent money, which was important for me at the time. So I thought, yeah, let's just see how it goes. Oh, you're still on mute, Aziz.
There we go. Sorry, I'm trying to avoid the train line. So I think we're probably going to get to the juiciest bit of your story in a way, is that how you made your money in those times up against your peers. So I don't know whether you want to sort of divulge how you got there, what gave you that competitive advantage.
Yeah, well, so I first started working. I did a couple of internships, but I didn't know what was going on. But I started full-time in June 2008, which, as I'm sure you're aware, 2008 is when the big financial crisis happened, when Lehman went bankrupt and sort of the financial world blew up a little bit. At the time, I didn't really know what was going on, to be honest. Short-term interest rates, which was where I worked, was really at the heart of this, because this is the team that makes short-term loans, basically. And that was a credit crisis. And basically, the supply of loans and money to banks completely dried up. So a lot of banks were desperately needing money. Other banks didn't want to lend because they were worried. They didn't know who was going to go bankrupt. So it was a pretty wild time, to be honest. And I would have been 21 at the time. I just started, and I had no idea what was going on. But lots of people in my area started to make suddenly a lot of money, basically, because people would pay a lot of money just to get access to any loan. So suddenly, my area, which had previously not been a particularly fashionable area of trading, suddenly people were making loads of money. And I was just thinking, I didn't really know what was happening, to be honest, but I just thought, let's try and figure this out, pretty much. I just sort of copied. There were some really good traders on my team. I just sort of copied what they were doing without really fully understanding what was happening. And relatively quickly, I started making quite big, what would have been previously quite big amounts of money, especially for somebody in their first year trading. Like I said, I was at that point, more than anything, I was just copying the other traders. But it worked quite well, quite quickly. But then we started to move into sort of the post-crisis period, and that's when I started to become more interested. So I guess I have to talk a little bit about the economics of what happened in 2008. So in 2008, there was this big crash. But central banks, like the Bank of England, all over the world, they responded by cutting interest rates really enormously. So to give you a sense, previous to 2008, central banks would do things like cut the rate from 5 3/4 to 5.5, or rise the rate from 4 to 4 1/4, this kind of thing. Suddenly, after 2008, basically every central bank in the world was just cutting from 4 or 5 down to 0. So it's massive, huge scale more than anything that happened before. Now, if you study economics, or if you studied it at the time, you are taught that these big interest rate moves, they have big effects on the real economy. They're supposed to get people out there spending. They're supposed to give a real economic recovery. So given this huge scale, really, you can't compare it to anything that happened before. Most people working in the city and most economists forecasting at the time, they basically said, well, we're going to have a big crash. But because of this huge response by the central banks, the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve in the US, the European Central Bank, we're going to have a really rapid bounce back. So most people were predicting that we'd get actually quite a lot of inflation and we'd get a rapid recovery, and these interest rates would have to be brought back up in the next, possibly even 1 year to 2 years. People are expecting a big recovery in interest rates. So obviously 2009 happened and rates didn't come up at all. People were saying, okay, well, this is a big crisis. It's going to take a bit longer. People started to say, well, rates will go up in 2010. We went into 2010 and still rates couldn't come up. And then people started to say, well, rates will go up in 2011. And, my job was to predict what's going to happen to these interest rates, right? And I studied at LSE and I'd learned all these economics telling us what's going to happen. And then when I was actually in the job, basically every single year, the predictions the market made were completely wrong. In 2008, people thought rates would maybe come down a bit and they collapsed to 0. In 2009, people thought they would come up quickly. They stayed at 0. In 2010, people thought they would come up quickly. They stayed at 0 again. So I started to think basically something that, to be honest, I still think now a little bit, which is most of these guys just have got no idea what's happening. For me, it was quite exciting. I mean, if you study, I guess a lot of people who study at university, you're taught that people understand things. Then you go into the real world where people are getting paid hundreds of thousands of pounds to make predictions and they're all wrong all the time. And I started to get a bit excited, basically thinking, if I can figure out what's happening here, I could probably make a lot of money because nobody understands what's happening, basically. Nobody understood really why, despite all of this huge amount of extra money poured in by central banks, these huge cuts in interest rates, why the economy didn't bounce back. And I started to, I went back and reading my textbooks and talking to people who I used to study with and talking to economists, saying, trying to think, why is it that people aren't spending? Because ultimately, the reason the central banks cut the rates is to get people spending. And the reason they couldn't raise the rates again is because it wasn't happening. People weren't spending. So I spent a long time thinking about, why aren't people spending? Why aren't the low interest rates getting people to spend? And I was thinking about this for a long time, and I was trying to sort of relate it back to people I know, basically. Just trying to bring it back to the real world. Why don't people spend more? And I was starting to sort of get into this idea that really it's not as complicated perhaps as what people think. The reason that most people aren't spending is just because they don't have any money. I mean, most people spend pretty much everything they make, at least people I knew, and a lot of people from back in Ilford I knew. So I was starting to try and think, well, if these people don't have any extra money, how are low interest rates going to help, And I was thinking about that a lot, sort of back end of 2010 and going into 2011. And then I went into this meeting in early 2011. And in 2011, it's a long time ago now, at that time, inflation was quite high in the UK. And everybody was saying the economy is really strong. We had this sort of strange idea in the media, which was that we had a strong economy and also a cost of living crisis because prices were going up and wages were not. And I still think that's like a really interesting way that journalists think about economics. If you think you can simultaneously have a strong economy and a cost of living crisis. But I was thinking about this a lot, basically. And everybody else was thinking prices are going up, the economy is recovering, interest rates are going to go up really soon. And I got called into this meeting in early 2011 with a guy called Matt King, who was an economist at Citi Bank. And he basically went through the financial position of a lot of the world's big banks, not banks, governments. So obviously the Italian, the Greek, Spanish, Portuguese governments, they were in big problems. But also the government of the UK and the government of the US had very big debts, and the debts were growing every year. And he was basically saying, this is going to drag the economy down for a long time, because these governments, they're going to have to cut their spending back because they're running out of money, basically. And then when I left this meeting, I was thinking, well, if the governments don't have any money left, if they've run out of money, if they're spending more than they get in every year, they have to stop spending because they're running out. People are doing the same. Well, then that's obviously why they're not spending. But also, where is the money? Who's got the money? You can see everything around you, all the houses, all the shopping centres, all the office buildings. They're all owned by somebody. But if people don't own it and the government don't own it, then who owns it? And that's when I realised, if the only group that can own this stuff is the rich, they're very rich, basically. These are the guys who own everything, and that is the reason why ordinary people can't spend. So I suddenly, for me, it was like penny dropped, really. I thought, this is it. This is the answer, really. The problem is inequality, and it's probably not going to get better, because at the time, people talk about inequality now, but back in 2011, nobody was talking about it. So I was convinced that since we're not going to fix inequality, we're not going to fix the economy, and that basically the economy is going to stay weak forever. That's a pretty depressing thing to say, but that was the idea that came to me at the time. And then I just went back and I started betting quite big that the economy would be weak forever. And then that just was depressingly, it was a really, really successful bet. And by the end of that year, I was the most profitable trader in the bank in the world, just basically on this one idea that the economy will be weak forever. And it continued to work. It's continued to work really for the last 6 or 7 years. So yeah, that's basically it's not the most uplifting story, but that's what happened.
Well, it's certainly interesting. I think just to sort of put it into context, just to ask you, let's talk about money a little bit, in terms of trading. So what's the value of a single trade that you would have done? What's the highest amount of money that you would have made for the bank in one day? What sort of figures are we actually talking about when it comes to trading? And for you to have been the most globally profitable trader for Citi Bank, I mean, how much were you bringing into the bank? What does that look like?
Yeah, so first on the trades. So most traders who work for investment banks, they've got a job of what is called market making, which basically means if you want to buy or sell a certain product, you're a big corporation like, I don't know, Sony, or you're a pension fund or a hedge fund, you'll call up the bank and the bank will get a price from the trader for that product. So day to day, most of what you do is just this kind of stuff. Really, it's kind of shopkeeping stuff, really. So my job was making short-term loans and borrowings in Swiss franc. So if you wanted to borrow Swiss franc, you would call me up and you would get that. And then I started doing euros as well. That actually took up lots of time. It was really busy doing short-term borrowings and lending of euros and Swiss francs. But you didn't really make that much money from that kind of thing. You made a little bit. But what you could make big money on was taking big bets on what's going to happen in the future, which some people call prop trading, basically. I think the banks have sort of clamped down on it a little bit, but back when I was there, you could still do quite a lot of it. So what I would do is you could look at the market, and the market would tell you exactly what we predict the central bank rate is going to be for the next 2 years. So at the moment, the Bank of England base rate in this country is 0.1%. And it was 0.75, I think, until quite recently. And it was cut because of the coronavirus crisis. Back in 2009, 2010, it was also very low, 0.5. But if you were to ask people what will it be in 2 years or 3 years, they would say, oh, it's going to be back up at 2.5% or 3% because we're going to get a big recovery. So the way you would make money basically is people would be willing to pay very high interest rates to borrow in the future because everybody thought rates were going to go up. So then if you lent them the money and in reality rates turned out to be low, when the time came, you could borrow the money back very cheaply and make the difference.
Okay.
So that was really where most of the big money was made, on these sort of big directional bets. And different traders traded in very different sizes. This one big trade on what's going to happen in the future, on a good day, it could make like $1 million or maybe even close to $2 million on a good day for the bank. And then over the course of 2011, I made $35 million for the bank, largely on this trade. A lot of traders do make more than that in other years, but on that 1 year, 2011, basically everyone was betting on there's going to be a big recovery, and I was a bit of a lone voice really in saying I don't think there's going to be a recovery. I think that we're going to be in this for the long run. Mm-hmm. So yes, obviously for the bank it's a lot of money. I don't get that personally, but yes, it's a lot of money that the bank can make on the back of my bets.
Yeah, they're all almost monopoly style figures there, aren't they? So in terms of, the atmosphere in the office, etc., I mean, if you were bringing in that sort of money, was no one sort of approaching you, asking you how you were doing it and sort of trying to get a piece of the action? What was the sort of the general consensus or, the general opinion of the other traders that you were working with when you were effectively betting against what they had been told was gospel?
It depends really. I think, that year, 2011, I was the most profitable trader in the bank. So my star was in the ascendance a little bit, and a lot of people sort of suddenly knew who I was. And especially because that year, a lot of traders were struggling. There were some more senior traders who I think were, maybe I rubbed them up the wrong way a bit. I might have been getting a bit too big for my boots. So I was still very young. 2011, I was only 24. So it was a lot to be suddenly like one of the top traders in the bank at that age. I think it really depends. The younger traders were really excited. A lot of like young interns coming in, graduates coming in, wanted to sit with me, talk with me about what I was doing. And I had a junior working with me at the time, and he was really interested. The older guys, some of them were interested. I was lucky when I worked at Citi Bank. I worked with one older guy who was really, really interested in the economy and had a really great perspective on things. And he always wanted to talk to me about what was happening. But I think if you're talking about the more senior guys, senior management, I think they don't really want to get involved. They just want you to make the money. I think they were perhaps, there's a bit of a worry sometimes maybe when somebody, especially someone young, maybe someone who talks like me, starts making a lot of money. People might be worried that maybe you're bending the rules a little bit, and they don't want you to stop making the money, but they don't want to be accountable if you get exposed doing something dodgy. So surprisingly, and I used to get quite frustrated, like management and senior management, they weren't really interested in how I was making the money at all. They were just, as long as I kept making it, they were happy really.
I think so. We've had a question from the audience. One of the participants has asked that, if the predictions that you were making were sort of against the predictions of the usual traders and what they thought were going to happen, how did the bank allow you to make such huge trades, especially when you didn't know that they were going to be profitable for quite some time? How did you get away with it, especially as being a young trader yourself?
Well, I think things might have changed a bit since I quit banking. But at the time, where I was at least, at Citibank, traders were given, if you had a decent track record that you'd made good money in the past years, you were given actually quite a lot of freedom to make your own bets, take your own positions. In fact, this is crazy. Let me just see if I've got something. 1 second. In fact, they used to really encourage us to take a lot of risk, so much so that just a couple of years after the financial crisis, they took us all out to a big manor house and gave us these camo hats. I don't know if you can see it, but on the front it says, "Go big or go home," which they gave this, it's unbelievable, but they gave this to all their traders. Basically, in the end, if I make money, the boss makes money, So if a trader has a good track record, they want you to bet on it. And in fact, if you're betting against other people on the floor, that's actually quite good for them, because if everyone on the floor bets in the same direction, it's a lot of risk for the bank as a whole. They'd rather really, some guys go some way, some guys go the other way, but the people who they deem the better traders take bigger bets and ultimately win money for the bank. So they didn't have a problem at all me betting against what everyone else was doing. Some individual traders might have been upset that I was betting against them and not talking to them about it. But the bank as a whole, they didn't mind. I mean, that year was a bad year for the bank because everyone was betting the wrong way and I was betting the right way. So really, you know, in a way, I was saving. For that year specifically, I was holding the team up because everyone was going in the other direction, you know.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you've made all this money in the bank, and then what happened next? You moved to Japan with the bank, didn't you?
Yeah. So 2011 was like a weird year, you know. Like I said, I come from quite a poor background, and I was quite intent on making money when I went into banking. And in my first year as a trader, I was really successful for a first year trader. I think I made the most ever for a first year trader. And to be honest, I didn't even know what I was doing. I was just sort of copying the successful traders. But I was really just committed to like making money, which I think a lot of people from poor backgrounds will relate to be honest. It's not much fun being poor. It's difficult, right? But over time, I became more interested in the economy, and I started thinking more and more about the economic side of things. And then, like I said, in 2011, I had this moment which I'd been building up to it for a while, which is the reason that spending is low in the economy, which is the reason that the economy as a whole is weak, is because of inequality. Because basically, if you give all the money to rich people don't spend most money they get, they save it. Pushes up house prices, pushes up stock prices, but it doesn't push up wages, which makes life difficult for ordinary people because you're not making much money. You have to buy a super expensive house. So I started to get involved in these ideas. And then 2011, obviously, I made this huge amount of money for the bank on the back of this idea. And it was a strange situation, right? Because I was successful, right? I was like the most profitable trader at the bank. I was making a lot of money. But I'd made that money on the back of a really pessimistic prediction. And not just a pessimistic prediction for that year, but a pessimistic prediction for like 20 years into the future, right? It's a strange situation to be in, you know, to make money from basically saying things are going to be terrible for a long time. And at the same time that year, like my boss, I had a couple of bosses who I really got on well with. And my boss had got a brain tumor and he had to quit. He was survived me. He's fine. He was a nice guy, but he had to quit. I got a new boss in who I really didn't like. I didn't get on with him at all. And suddenly I was like much more high profile, and all senior management wanted to talk to me. And my new boss came in and he was saying things like, "Oh, you know, you're doing really well, but we don't think we can pay you this year." And basically, I'd gone quite quickly from dealing with my team members, who actually a lot of them are really nice people I got on well with, to like these senior management guys who, in my personal opinion, not very nice people and not very nice to deal with. And it was all big politics about, are we going to pay you? Are we not going to pay you? So the thing is, back then in investment banking, you could make a lot of money, but the way it was, your salary was not particularly high. You would work all year. If you made a lot of profit for the bank, at the end of the year, they're supposed to pay you a big bonus. But what if they just don't pay you? I had a friend who worked for Bank of America. He made loads of money. At the end of the year, they just fired him. Didn't pay him, you know. And then when these guys started playing games with me, like, I just started to think, like, you know, for me, that amount of money that I could have made that year, like, I'm not from a rich background. That amount of money is security for me forever, for me, for my family. You know what I mean? And then for people to just come in and start playing games with me, I just started to realize, like, I'm not sure these people are my people, you know, at the same time. And then friends back home at the same time. You know, I graduated in 2008. A lot of my friends back home, they struggled to get into decent jobs. They struggled to establish themselves as adults because it was a really difficult environment, you know. And here's me making a load of money by betting that that's going to continue. So I had a lot of like strange thoughts going on in my head, really, about what is the right thing to do here? What am I supposed to do? And after the end of 2011, I got paid my bonus, and that basically sort of, once I got that, I was financially secure, and I started to like think about, well, what do I want to do now? Is it really right for me to stay here making more money when I think, I thought then, and I still think, I have an understanding about what's happening in the economy and that it's going to be bad, you know. So my manager called me in to follow my half-yearly meeting the next year. I just said to him, I think I just want some time out. Take some time out, just have a think about what I want to do. And then suddenly senior management went crazy. Like, I guess I didn't really realize it at the time, but like, as a trader, if you're making a lot of money for the bank, suddenly a lot of very senior people take a lot of interest in you because they're making money off you as well, basically. And then everybody was freaking out, and they basically said to me, look, we can't give you a sabbatical, which is what I've been asking for, but we can send you to Japan. And I said to my boss, you know, I don't think that's a good idea because I'm losing motivation now. I don't think I can do it. And my boss said to me, you don't understand, you have to go. And I was like, what does that mean? I don't really understand what that means. But I was like, if you're going to play hardball with me, then whatever. I'll just go to Japan. And if I don't like it, then I'll quit after the next bonus day and I'll go and do what I want, basically. So yeah, I moved to Japan. That started the Japan phase of my story. But to be honest, by the time I went to Japan, like I was still I'd lost my motivation, basically. I think I really wanted to understand what was happening. I really wanted to figure it out. I really wanted to make money and get financial security, but I'd done all of those things, and just trading, it just wasn't offering anything for me anymore. I think, like, for me, like, when I grew up, I was quite hungry for money. And to be honest, I don't begrudge anyone from wanting to make money if you're from a poor background, because I've been poor and it's not fun. It's difficult. People look down on you. You can't do things what other people can do. But suddenly I wasn't poor no more. And I saw all these guys working in banking, and I knew how much money they had. And all they was doing was just working for more money, for more money, for more money. And at the same time, here's me betting every year the economy is going to be bad for 10 years, you know. And I just thought, this is not a good situation. You know? We need to do something, you know. So I started to tell management at the bank, like, I'm not sure what I want to do. But they really just wanted me to sit there and just keep trading, keep making money. So then I waited till the next bonus day, which was in January. And then I went into a meeting with my boss and I said, look, I can't do this anymore. I want to, I'm going to leave. I said to him, work the rest of the year for no bonus if you want. But after that, I'm going to go leave. I'm going to go work for charity. I'm going to try and work on inequality.
So there's quite a story there, isn't there, really, how you became, you know, how a bank that had effectively started your career and given you your start in life, you became quite passionately against them and how they worked, which is really interesting. So I think moving on from that, I mean, is there, you know, you spent some time in Japan, was there anything that, you know, was trading different there? You know, I know from our previous conversations that you learnt Japanese, so you probably fit right in.
Well, I didn't know. When I first moved, I didn't know any Japanese. Trading was super, super different. Like the trading floor that I worked in London, really loud, lots of big characters shouting, not physical fighting, but you would get some fighting, you know, like aggression, people shouting across the floor. The Japanese trading floor, like you could hear a pin drop, you know, it was like quiet. There wasn't the kind of action I was used to. And I didn't have no team. I had one junior and I had 3 bosses. In London, I was in like a big team of traders. But in Japan, I just had 3 bosses. I had one boss, Japanese boss, who would just sit next to me. And he didn't have no job but to just look at me all day. That was quite stressful. Then I had another boss at the end of the floor. He would keep looking at me a bit. And then I literally had a boss on the camera. He would just be there, little camera looking at me. He was based in Australia. And it wasn't really the sort of, I missed the camaraderie of the London team. But to be honest, I'd lost the motivation a while before. Japan is a great country. By the end of my time there, I learned Japanese. I really loved it. But when I first moved there, like I was so falling out of love, like with this job. Like I did it in London for 4 years, and I got so into it. I got so good at it. I got so interested in the economics of it. But by the time I moved to Japan, like I was still making money as a trader. I didn't really care anymore. I wanted to get out, basically.
So, what year did you leave the bank officially?
So that was 2013 when I told my boss I want to go work for charity. But I didn't actually officially leave the bank until 2014.
Seemed like it was quite a messy divorce process.
Yeah, so like, I didn't really, maybe I was quite naive, but, you know, when I told my boss, like, I'm going to quit and work for charity, like, I thought I was just going to quit and work for charity, but some people, I think, didn't want that to happen. So, at the time, my boss just said to me, yeah, that's fine. Take a week, go think about it. Think about what you're going to do if you really want to do that. I was like, okay, fine. I came back in a week and I said, look, I'm going to quit and work for charity. And so at this point, you get some quite, when you're, I don't know if it's still this way now, but back then, especially if you were young, or really for anyone who earned a lot of money as a trader, to avoid people just taking the money and leaving straight away, they would do this deferred compensation. So it's like, okay, we'll give you this amount of money in 3 years if you still at the bank, you know? But there was a clause in that said if you go work for charity or some other things, you can just leave and take that money. So, you know, there was a level of self-interest in me taking that option. But, you know, I needed that. That money is a huge amount of money. Like, I needed that money to be able to take that route, really. And he said to me, look, after 1 week, I went back and he said, you still want to do it? And I said, yeah, I still want to do it. And he just basically said, well, you can't do it. You can't do it. If you want to take that clause in your contract, actually, we, the bank, have discretion of whether you take it or not, and you can't take it, so you have to stay. And I was like, I was a bit knocked back by that. It was a bit of a shock because then, like, I'd really upset my boss. So, like I said, whether they pay you or not is up to them. So, if you upset your boss, you're in a bit of trouble. You might not be getting paid anymore. And also, I couldn't leave. And then I was just like, this is like not good. And the stress of it was really getting to me. But I just thought, well, what I'll do is I'll just take it easy. I'll try and just relax for a bit, take a couple of weeks, not work too hard, and I'll see how it goes. So I started working 9 to 5, which was my contracted hours. Instead of like, these guys in Japan, they're working like 6 a.m. till like 9 p.m. And I did that for like a week. And then my boss, he said to me, like, come out for dinner with me tonight. This guy, we went out for dinner with him. And we sat down. I remember it very vividly. We was having a ramen. He was sitting there across. He was a big guy, big hands he had. I remember him eating his ramen. But he basically told me this long story. Basically said, look, you know, there used to be this guy, really good young trader, worked for Deutsche Bank. And, you know, one day he said, like, he wanted to leave banking. He just decided, and he thought he could just leave and just take all the money that he'd earned and just leave. But actually, the bank didn't want him to leave, you know. So they looked through his record and they found some stuff on him, and they took him to court. And they just kept him in court for years and years and years, going back to court all the time until he was bankrupted. This guy told me this story, right? Just sitting there, and I was thinking, like, when I was a teenager, I used to hang around with like some dodgy people sometimes, you know. And my idea was I would go into banking to get away from this. Here was this guy, right? He literally said to me, we can make life very difficult for you. He said to me, I think you're a good person, but sometimes bad things happen to good people. This guy said this to me. I couldn't believe what this guy was saying. I was like, because this is kind of like street hood talk. You know what I mean? I couldn't believe what was happening, seriously. And I was like, obviously that was quite scary. You can imagine. I was quite stressed out about that. Like, and at the same, you know, this was 2013 now. So I was still 26. I was not old, you know. And like, I spent all my time thinking about the economy. Like, I wasn't prepared for some sort of weird, like, mafia style battle with this guy. It was super stressful. Yeah, it was quite scary. I went back home after that and I started thinking, like, you got in with some bad people here. Like, this is not good. And it was a difficult time, really, because I was alone in Japan. I didn't know no one. You know, I didn't speak the language. And here's this guy, like, basically out and out threatening me, like. But yeah, I had like a little. I went home and I couldn't sleep. Like, my brain was just going. Like, this guy's just basically declaring war on you. Like, you got to do something. I don't want to get too much into that because it developed into a bit of an antagonistic situation between me and this guy and some senior management at Citi Bank. It lasted a long time. That was in the beginning of 2013. I didn't quit until I didn't finally actually leave Citi Bank until the middle of 2014. But let's just say nobody got sued in the end. It took 18 months, which was a long time. but nobody got sued, which was a relief because, you know, I didn't have time for that. And I got out. It took a year and a half, but I was able to leave the bank, and I was able to get all the money the bank owed me, which was enough for me to be financially secure. Enough for me to start thinking about what I wanted to do and not have to worry about things. But it was a difficult 18 months.
And who paid for the ramen?
You know what? He insisted on paying for it. And I was just like shell shocked, really. And then he wanted to shake my hand at the end of it. And I remember thinking, this guy wants to shake my hand after that stuff he said. Like, it's not good, really.
Yeah, I suppose it becomes just becomes common practice, doesn't it? Perhaps.
I don't know how
sort of
common
language.
Maybe this guy is more crazy than usual. I would like to think that, you know, there's a lot of bankers have bad reputations, and, you know, when I talk about this guy, I don't think he was a good guy, and he still works in banking. I still don't think he's a good guy. But the truth is, I met a lot of really interesting, smart people when I was in banking. So I don't want to like tie everyone with the same brush. There's some people I worked with who are really nice guys, but yeah, he's not on that list.
So I think, you know, that probably moves us on quite nicely to what you're up to now. You know, how you have now started learning economics and developing your economic theories. And obviously, in order to do that, you need an academic background. So you continued studying, didn't you, after you left the bank?
Yeah, so, well, I came back. I quit that job finally in 2014. I moved back to London. Obviously, that 18 months before I quit was pretty stressful. I took a bit of time out, did a bit of traveling, you know, caught up with my friends and my family. It was quite strange to be like not working after so many years of like working such an intense job and being like so into my job. And like I was thinking about the job economics all the time. But I just came back and I tried to like de-stress and like deal with the stuff that had happened, because some pretty crazy stuff had happened in the previous like 18 months. But I was still looking for ways, like, you know, I made a lot of money by betting that the economy will be weak for a long time. And I still do make money by betting on that. And I think it still will be weak for a long time. And that's not a good situation, you know. And that's like my skill to understand the economy. So I thought I needed to say something, you know. So I was looking for like a way to like get my voice out there. I started talking to like some people. There's an organization called the New Economics Foundation in London that talks about like different ways of approaching the economy, trying to understand it from the perspective of ordinary people. Some guy put me in touch with them, and I went there and I volunteered there for a bit with a guy called James Meadaway. He was a really nice guy, smart guy. Learned a little bit about some alternative ways of thinking about the economy. And while I was there, I wrote my website, wealtheconomics.org, just explaining like in really simple language why wealth inequality is really important for the economy, how it affects wages, how it affects house prices, how it affects, for example, the split between London and the north of England and other parts of the world. So I put that website up, and, you know, that took a couple of months to like write that out. And then I put it up, and then I just realized like, well, putting a website up, it's not going to do anything. Like, you know, nobody's going to read the website because nobody knows who you are, you know. So I thought, okay, well, I have to do something now. Either I have to like go on some like promotional tour or something on my website, or I'm going to have to go back to university and see if I can sort of change the way economics is thought about there. So I applied to a lot of universities. I wanted to go to Berkeley, actually, in California, because they've got some good inequality guys there, but they rejected me, so I had to go to Oxford. So I went to Oxford, and that started 2.5 years ago now. I went to Oxford. And that was disappointing. Like to be honest, like, I don't know if anyone on the call has studied economics at university, but having studied economics at university and then having worked in markets, like, it's pretty clear which one of these two groups of people has the better understanding of what's going on and has the better resources and has the better support. Really, like, it just seemed like a bunch of old rich people doing maths on whiteboards. You know, like what I did was betting on interest rates. Really, if you do that, you're betting on the economy. If you bet interest rates are going to be low forever, you're saying the economy is going to be weak forever. If you bet interest rates are going to go up, you're betting the economy is going to be strong, you know. So we had the professor talking to us about interest rates. He was a lecturer on interest rates. And I went up after him and I said, why do you think it is that economists have been saying interest rates will go up for 10 years when they haven't gone up for 10 years? And he said, what are you talking about? Like, we always knew this was going to happen. I couldn't, really. So I said to him, honestly, I was disgusted because this guy is a professor at Oxford University, you know, and he works for a discipline that has for 10 years said things are going to get better next year. And people are suffering because things aren't getting better, all right? And I said to him, why have you guys been wrong for 10 years? And this guy said, we haven't been wrong. These guys are so incompetent, they literally don't know they're incompetent. Honestly, it's a crime how bad these guys are. And of course, it doesn't matter. Look, and I said to him, I went back and I sent him the data, you know, and then he was like, oh, you're right. So then I met up with him and he said, like, you seemed angry. I said, of course I'm angry because real things are happening. You don't talk about it. I said to him, why don't you talk about the housing crisis? And he said, oh, well, the housing crisis is only in London. And I said, yeah, the housing crisis is only in London because the rest of the country, there's no damn jobs. And he said to me, yeah, there are jobs outside of London. I've got a job. This guy is an economics professor at Oxford University. As if you're going to tell some fisherman who lost his job in Grimsby, oh, it's all right, there's jobs going spare at Oxford University as an econ professor. Maybe you should apply for that one. Like these guys, the truth is, look, it's a bunch of old rich people from rich families who don't have any idea what life is like for ordinary people, doing maths on whiteboards. They don't even know they've been wrong for 10 years in a row. Like, seriously, I couldn't believe it, you know. Plus, they made me wear a bow tie to the exams, and I wasn't happy about that.
So you finished your degree, and then so obviously you've made you know, your own predictions, and so what are you doing now to sort of try and help that and sort of present your theories of economics and your view on economics to the world, I suppose, to Britain first and then the world next?
Yeah, so you know, I did this degree 2 years at Oxford. Yeah. Oh, I should probably say, you know, there was some cool people at Oxford. There was some interesting people, just not the economics professors. You know, I wrote, like, I did a bit of work there, and I sort of, after 2 years, I started to think, look, to be honest, look, there's good guys out there doing good work in economics. So there's people like Thomas Piketty and Gabriel Zuckman, and there's this guy, Ludwig Straub, I've been talking to. Like, there's good people out there doing good work. But in the end, having spent 2 years at Oxford and seeing the PhD students that look like they wanted to top themselves, really, like, stuck in their little rooms, writing on whiteboards, I don't think the change is going to come from academic economics. There's good people in there doing good work, but I don't think it's going to come from there. I think really, like, I mean, in the end, almost everyone in that subject, not everyone, but almost everyone comes from a very comfortable financial background, and them and their families are doing fine. Really, like, if we want change that's going to make things better for ordinary people, it's going to have to come from ordinary people. So I basically decided, like, I'm going to have to get out there and just try and talk to people and try and make a presence, try and spread my voice directly to people, because economics as a discipline is not going to achieve that. So, yeah, so then I came out and I decided, well, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start trying to build a bit more of a public profile, try and do some writing for, you know, websites and newspapers, try and get some people aware of who I am and listening to my stuff, and then try and get some people reading my website. But ultimately, just try and build up a place where, a bit of a space for myself to express some other ideas about economics. Because even though inequality is like a big issue for a lot of people, really, it's still not a big issue for most economists. And people, they don't think the way to fix the housing crisis is to solve inequality. They don't think the way to bring wages up is to solve inequality. I think people are not really aware of that. So I want to sort of build up a bit of a voice to spread these ideas. That was sort of my plan. A few things came up actually after I finished uni that sort of delayed me a little bit. So I wasn't really able to get into that until earlier this year. And then obviously the coronavirus happened, and that's like a massive thing for the economy. Like, really, like, you see the stories in the newspapers, like GDP 20% down, but really for most people so far, most people actually being relatively protected, and we ain't seeing anything. But we're going to see some big stuff happening in the next 2 years. Some big things, big changes in the economy, and it's not going to be good for most people, in my opinion. And when this stuff happened, like, it took me back to the 2008 crisis and the 2011 sovereign debt crisis. And as soon as it happened, like, for me, like, having spent a lot of time looking at markets and looking at economics, when a big thing happens, the first question is, how is this going to affect the distribution of wealth? How is this going to affect the rich versus how it's going to affect the middle versus how it's going to affect the poor? And then I saw straight away, like, this coronavirus crisis is going to be worst for the poorest people. And it's actually going to enrich the rich people, which really, in hindsight, if you go back and look at the 2008 crisis, it did the same. After the 2008 crisis, the rich made loads of money because stock prices went through the roof, house prices went up, everything these guys own went up. At the same time, wages went down. So when this came up, I was like, bang on it, like, straight away, like, we need to get going. And I opened the computer up and I just, like, put some money into a trading account and started bashing out, doing some trades. At the same time, I started writing, like, what's going to happen here, how it's going to be bad for ordinary people, especially poorer people, that kind of long-term effect it's going to have. And I just sent this article out to the local momentum group, which I've been involved with a little bit. And they came back and some guys said they want to publish it. And then that started getting a lot of circulation. And then suddenly, like, people wanted more articles. So I wrote another article about that, explaining what's going to happen moving forward in the coronavirus crisis. And, you know, I don't like to be always giving bad news, but I don't think it's going to be good. You know, I think it's going to be bad, especially for people from poor backgrounds. And that's not, you know, that's not good, but we're not seeing it yet. It's going to happen. So I want to prepare people what's going to happen. I want to prepare people to start using their voice to say, look, in my opinion, we're going to see if I'm right, but in the past, I've been right on these things. This crisis is going to lead to the rich getting richer. And it's going to lead to things that are already quite bad for, you know, the poorer people and even people in the middle of society getting worse. And really what I'm trying to do now is to get the voice out there saying it doesn't have to be like this. We need to develop ways of making the richest pay taxes, because at the moment they don't pay much, and dealing with it in a better way. So yeah, that's what I'm doing now. I've written a couple of articles, and hopefully I'm going to start doing a few videos and seeing what other opportunities come up to sort of build a bit more of a voice, basically.
And in terms of those predictions, I mean, why do you believe that the rich are going to be richer? And what, I suppose, also in the sort of bracket, what do you, as an income, what do you think classes you as rich? What sort of rich are we talking about?
Yeah, this is a question that I get, like, quite a few times. This specific crisis, it's a funny one because the central bank, the Bank of England, and it's the same in pretty much all other countries, they've printed a huge amount of money, right? So the Bank of England has committed to printing £200 billion. That is, I think sometimes with these huge numbers, we don't realize how huge they are, right? £200 billion is about £4,000 for every adult in the country. It's twice the net worth of Jeff Bezos, which is a lot. You can go have a look on the internet. It's huge, the amount of money they're printing. But when that happens, it can disguise what's happened, right? Because this printed money substitutes the income. So in the initial shock of the coronavirus crisis, a lot of people lost their jobs straight away, right? It's about a quarter of people have been furloughed. And there's a decent amount more who have lost their job and not been furloughed. So these guys have lost all their income, but the government jumps in and provides a replacement income, which I don't criticize at all. Like, of course, the government has to do that because these guys are destitute if they don't get that. But when the government prints the money instead of getting the money from the richest in society, then that increases the total amount of money in our economy. So somebody has to end up with more money than they started. But the furloughed workers, if you look at their actual situation, they're getting less income than they were getting before the crisis happened, right? So even though these are the guys receiving the new money, they're not the guys keeping the new money. Net, they're down from where they started, right? So we have to work out where the money is going, right? So the reason the furloughed workers are not making money overall is because they've lost their wages. So where are the wages, right? Well, the wages are not coming from the companies because the companies are not getting any income because the customers are not going to the companies. So actually, if you follow the money through the system, you find that the extra money that has been pumped in, even though the government is paying money to the furloughed workers, the people who actually accumulate money are customers who are no longer spending. But when you look at that, you realize that it's not all customers who are no longer spending. Poorer people and people near the middle, most of their spending is on essentials, rent, bills, food, things they have to pay anyway. So those guys are not really actually spending that much less than they ordinarily would. But if you look at really rich people who have huge amounts of spending, and most of it is on non-essentials, their spending has collapsed. And these guys, as a result, especially when you add in the fact that most furloughed workers come from lower income jobs, whereas most better paid workers have kept their jobs, it's actually really that sort of top 10, 20% that is accumulating money here. And I said this at the start, but now there's a lot of data on it supporting that idea, basically, that richer workers are accumulating money during this crisis. So in this specific case, it's not even just the super rich who are making money. But I think when we look at what's going to happen in the next 2 years, my predictions are personally, we're going to see, once again, stock prices rise a lot, house prices rise. You know, that could take a bit of time, but I think it will happen. That is going to benefit the rich once again. So when we talk about who's rich, I think we have to accept that it's not just the very rich who have been accumulating money in the last couple of months. It's even people in maybe top 20% or maybe 25, 30% they've been accumulating money. But in the long run, that money is going to be used to pump up stock prices, is going to pump up property prices. And the people who really benefit from that are the really rich. And we've already started to see that, you know, US stock prices rose 50% in 3 months just recently. That's crazy, you know. And, you know, everybody can look back and see what happened in 2008 now. We all know that what happened in 2008 caused stock prices to double. It caused house prices to double. You know, some stocks went up 300, 400%. And it makes the rich richer. And it makes simple, necessary things like housing unaffordable for ordinary people.
So what do you think the government should do? What sort of tax do you think that they should put on the wealthy, and what sort of, you know, annual income bracket do you think that they should be applying the tax to?
So personally, the thing that I'm pushing now, which is something I've been interested in for a long time really, is looking at taxes on wealth rather than income. Because the truth is that you might have a relatively high income and not be that rich. You know, a lot of people nowadays, to be honest, like in our generation, it's becoming more and more clear that really how rich you are is not that much about what you do, it's about what your parents did, really. Because I don't know about you, but people I know that have houses, their parents helped them get that house, you know. So I don't really want to be pushing necessarily income taxes unless it's on very high incomes, because people who have high incomes are not necessarily that rich. You know? I had a high income, okay, you know, I did make a lot of money and I should have paid a lot of tax, but there's people out there who come from super billionaire families that basically don't pay anything, because the way the tax system is set up right now is very good at taxing income from work, but it's very bad at taxing people who are just really, really rich and make their money from being really, really rich. You know, as an ordinary person, you don't really see that, right? But, you know, if you have assets, you make money from those assets, you know. So if someone's got, you know, £2 million of assets, which is a lot, but it's not a crazy amount, you know, they might be making £60,000 a year just from those assets, you know. But if someone's got 10 million, well, they could be making a couple 100,000 just from their assets, you know. And the way that the tax system is set up right now, these guys are basically paying very, very little tax. And if we're talking about people who have hundreds of millions, you know, if you think about someone who has £100 million, they make every year, just for getting out of bed, they make like £6 million just for getting out of bed. And think about what they're going to do with that money. Think about what you would do if you got given £6 million a year just for living. Well, you wouldn't spend 6 million, would you? You'd spend, I mean, to be honest, you don't even spend 1 million. You spend 200 grand a year. You're living absolute life of luxury, right? And use the rest of that 5 million, 6 million to buy other people's houses, and you push house prices up, you know. So if we allow the rich to accumulate wealth like this, then they're obviously going to push up house prices, and they're going to suck in all the houses. Like my friends, you know, some of my friends are from relatively well-off backgrounds and some are not. The ones from not well-off backgrounds, their mum sold their houses to those rich guys, and they don't have houses no more. Their families won't have houses. And that is where the houses are going. If you look at the home ownership percentage of young people in this country, it's absolutely collapsed in 10, 15 years. But what does that mean? It means that in future generations, if your family is poor now, if your family doesn't have a house now, your family will never have a house. And if house prices double again, what does that mean? It basically means that we're basically condemning the bottom half of society to being poor forever. So we need to find ways to make not just high income people pay tax, but we need to go after really high wealth individuals and high wealth families, because those are the guys that basically own everything. And if we don't tax them, then it's going to be talking about more taxes on doctors, more taxes on lawyers. And I don't necessarily want to tax those people. I want to tax the people who really have the money.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting point. I think, I think we've probably covered your story quite well in the last hour and 10 minutes. And so I think the final question from me, unless we have any from the audience, is, well, where should I put my money then?
So everyone,
you said you've been moving some trades around. Where am I putting it? EasyJet, Ryanair?
It's a funny one, because I put this article up in The Guardian basically saying, inequality is terrible. We need to find some way to tax the rich. We need to fix the problem. And I got like 100 articles on Twitter saying, where should I put my money? Where should I put my money? The truth is, like,
you can't help it. You can't help it. It's
the truth is,
human
like,
nature.
There's a lot of financial uncertainty now, and it puts at risk the future of individuals and people's families. So obviously, before I say anything about this, you need to understand, of course, that any predictions about what happens in the future, we can't be 100% certain about this. So it's my prediction about what will happen. Anything you do, any financial trades you do, any risk you take is risk. So don't go crazy. Don't do any crazy stuff. Don't take any financial gambles that are going to put your financial situation at risk. But the primary thing I would say now is, I cannot overemphasize the importance of the big amounts of money that are being printed by the central bank. The central bank is printing £200 billion. Personally, I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up being twice that or more, because we're going to enter a long period of economic difficulty. The government is going to need to raise a lot of money, and the easiest way to raise that is going to be printing money. So what that means is, if we massively increase the money supply, then we're going to decrease the value of money. You have a lot more money, the money's not worth as much. So this is a problem for a lot of people from relatively ordinary backgrounds, because poorer people, ordinary people, they often keep their savings in cash, like 100% in cash. So if there's a big devaluation of money, that puts you at quite possibly at risk, because it's difficult to predict house prices, but they could double in the next 4 or 5 years. They could. And if you're sitting in cash, you get 0%, and then prices are going up, you're losing your money. You know what I mean? So if you do have a lot of money, big amount of money, and stored entirely in cash, it might be sensible to look into diversifying a little bit into other assets rather than just keeping it all in cash. I know, like, it's very easy and to think cash is the safest. But when the government is printing £200 billion of cash out of thin air, it's not the safest anymore, and they're going to print more. So if you have a lot of money sitting in cash, maybe you're saving up a deposit to buy a house or something. If you can get that house soon, get it, because you're safer having the house. You got a house, you got a house. You got cash in the bank, you don't know what's going to happen to house prices. I would say if you can get that house, get it. We might have a little dip in house prices coming out of this. But if you get the house, then you got a house, you got a place to live. It's a lot more safe than having just a ton of cash in the bank, which could get devalued. If you don't have enough to get the house, you might want to look into diversifying a little bit, buying some stocks. I'm a little bit hesitant to promote buying stocks, because stocks have gone up unbelievably quickly in the last 3 months. There's risks of a second wave of coronavirus, which could cause problems to stocks. I'm a bit hesitant to promote them because they've gone up so much, but ultimately, I think especially in the long run, they're safer to hold in cash. Personally, I've bought a lot of gold, which, don't go crazy and put all your money in gold, but I think it's probably safer to hold in cash because they're printing cash and they can't print gold. That would be my personal advice. If you're looking to buy a house, don't wait around too much. Try and get that done, because look, they could come down in a bit, in a year's time, they could be lower, and we don't know what's going to happen with Brexit. That's a whole nother mystery. But to be honest, if you don't have a house, you don't have a house. If you do have a house, you've got a place to live. So I would say if you've got money in cash and you can get a house, get a house. If you can't get a house, consider moving a little bit into some other investments like stocks or gold. I think it's probably safer. Also, like, a lot of my friends who are from poorer backgrounds, their parents sell the house. If you can keep the house in the family, keep it, because I don't like to see families lose the house and never get a house again. If you know people who's like, people, their mom's thinking about selling the house, obviously be sensitive about the situation and that. But if you can keep a house in your family, you should, because if you lose it, Like the way things are going, I don't know when you're going to get back. That's not a positive prediction, but that's what I would advise.
That's very interesting. Thank you for that. I think probably all the participants are busy buying gold at the moment, but if they've got any, if there's any questions, feel free to turn off your microphone, your mute, and ask them directly to Gary.
I have a question. So thanks, Gary. Your story is fascinating. I mean, I wish I was a fly. I'd been a fly in that trading floor to hear all the stuff that was going on back then. But my question is slightly provocative or philosophical, I don't know. But would you consider inequality as a byproduct of capitalism, or do you think a society that is a capitalist society can coexist with equality?
It's a big question. It's some big words in it. Sometimes I get a little bit concerned when people say it's a byproduct of capitalism, just because different people mean different things when they say capitalism. You know what I mean? For me, like, you know, I grew up in society. I don't really know any other way to manage a society other than free ownership and free trade, this kind of thing. I think that you can have capitalist societies that are less unequal. If you go back, for example, and look at the UK or a lot of other European countries in sort of 30 years after the Second World War, we had a period where there was less inequality. There was a lot less inequality. At that time, there were a variety of very high taxes on the richest people, and that kept inequality down. And I don't think it's a coincidence that if you go back and look at the period in history when inequality was low, 60s, 70s, this kind of time, house prices were like 2-3 times income back then, and interest rates were 7-8%. You know, so if you go back to a time when there was low inequality, even in a capitalist society like the UK, housing was affordable. So I'm an economist in the end. I'm a classically trained economist. You know, I'm not really able to say like transform into a communist economy. I understand the capitalist economy. I think it can work relatively well if we manage inequality such that it stays relatively low and controlled. I'm not saying like get rid of all inequality, like perfect equality. But what I'm saying is there's capitalist economies with high inequality, and they tend to be economies where wages are low and where housing is unaffordable. And there's capitalist economies with lower inequality, such as, well, we're getting less and less of them now, but like the 30 years after the Second World War. And those economies tend to have more affordable housing and basic essentials. So I'm more of a reformer than a radical. I think if we reduce inequality, we can see big increases in quality of living. So that's what I'm pushing.
So do you think it's greed that has led us down this path? You know, the greed of the rich that has sort of enhanced this inequality in society?
I mean, you know, I've done a bits of reading on this, and there's people who know more about the history of how we moved from the sort of higher tax on the rich society towards a society which places very low taxes on the rich. There's a lot of questions about whether it's to do with the increased mobility of capital nowadays, whether it's to do with money in politics. I mean, you can clearly go back and see in the 80s, there was a shift towards lower taxes on the rich. And there were reasons why they did that at the time. Some people would tell you that perhaps wealthy individuals lobbied for those changes. But to be honest, I'm an economist more than a political historian. So I probably wouldn't be able to tell you how it happened. All I can really say is we need to find some way to stop it from spiraling out of control. So like I say, even me, I'm not saying we need to get rid of inequality completely. But what I'm saying is we can't just allow it to get higher and higher and higher and higher without any sensible measurement or any sensible control. If that keeps happening, then you can just expect houses to become more and more and more unaffordable. You know? So I'm sure there's elements of greed. You know, I worked in the finance industry. You know, I see greed, and you know, I've experienced it myself. You know, it's easy to just look after yourself and not worry about what's happening to other people. But at the same time, now I think, especially for young people, more and more people are losing out in the system. So even if we are greedy, we need to find some way to come together and fix a system that is not working for a lot of people.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks. You're on mute, Zeus.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to ask Gary while we've got him here before? There's a question that has come from the audience that's been written. It says, which political party do you think offers the most hope in the UK?
I'm hesitant to get too much into politics because I know people have very strong opinions about politics, and my expertise is economics more than politics.
Probably why it's an anonymous question.
But look, my economic position, as I think someone who knows a lot about economics, is we need to do something about inequality. Obviously, the Conservative government that's been in charge for the last 10 years, in my opinion, doesn't appear to have done anything particularly meaningful about making inequality better, addressing the problems we have of getting the richest to pay taxes. So I'm not particularly supportive of the government that we have in charge right now. I think really, I always look at, who is going to realistically look at taxing the richest, but also doing it in a sensible way, such that we don't damage our economy. I tend to vote for more the centre-left parties than the centre-right, but look, what I really want is to get inequality on the agenda. So I'm not too actively in politics, but I want to try and persuade the parties to talk about inequality, not just as a concept of fairness, but a concept of hard-nosed dollars and cents. Really, if you don't fix inequality, you're not going to make housing affordable, and you're not going to give people decent wages. So whichever party is going to do that, then I'll vote for them.
Lovely. I can see that also a lot of your articles do seem to be picked up by more lefty rather than righty parties. So there's definitely a bit of that people sort of the issues that you raise and discuss resonate more with the left, perhaps. So perhaps that answers your question for yourself. Dushan, do you have a question? I notice you've unmuted yourself.
I have a question. Mohan, am I the sound on?
Yes, yeah, your sound's on.
Yeah. My simple question is currency trading contributing to the economy, or is it completely milking the financial system and nothing else? What is it?
That's a big question. As somebody who's participated in that system, you never really stop to think, what are we doing here? I mean, in a capitalist economy, you do need markets and you do need traders. I think the amount that, I don't know if the payment of traders has changed much. I think the amount that traders get paid, it's a lot. I remember when I got my first bonus when I was working at Citi Bank. And like I've said a number of times, I didn't come from a well-off background. My dad worked he worked for the Royal Mail for years and years. He used to get up early in the morning and go to work, and we didn't have a lot of money. And then the amount I made in my first bonus when I was only like 22 maybe or something, it's maybe what he would earn in like, 15 years, 20 years. And I didn't realize going into it that it was that kind of money that was going around. And obviously I was happy to make that money, but I was kind of shocked. And I thought about what life was like for me growing up, like not having money, not to just like buy a lunch, this kind of thing, and what life was like for my parents. And I don't really think it's right that there's such big disparities, at least while there's so much poverty. So I don't mind people getting rich. I don't mind people making money. I've made a decent amount of money myself, but I don't think we should have that at the same time as we allow so many people to struggle so much, even people who have jobs, even people who are working, trying their best. Yeah. In terms of like whether we need traders as a system, my instinct is that you do need traders in the capitalist market system. But to be honest, I haven't thought enough about the structural role to tell you much about it. But yeah, I think that's what I stand at. I think that there is a space for them. And I think in the world we live in today, to be honest, the best economic analysis probably comes from traders. It's just a shame that economic analysis is not in the public sector at all. You know what I mean? Like when I was working at Citi Bank, my job was to trade Swiss rates, right? But there was also an economist whose job was to put out reports on Swiss rates. And I was getting paid like 10 times what she was getting paid. So if you go and ask Citi Bank, what's your opinion on Swiss rates? They know they're giving you a second-rate opinion. They know they're giving you a second-rate opinion because they're paying me 10 times as much to manage their money, and I'm not allowed to say anything publicly. So the system as we have it at the moment is privatizing the best economic knowledge. I mean, think about it. If you were like a smart young kid, you got an economics degree, you can go do a PhD, spend loads of money, and then make like 40, 50 grand a year after getting yourself hundreds of grand into debt. Or you can go work in a city and you could be making £500,000 in a couple of years. You know what I mean? So really, the system as it is taking all the best economists away from the public.
Very true. Very true.
So in an ideal world, the best economists would be working for society rather than for a bunch of rich people. But I think, you know, I can't at the moment envisage a society without traders. And I love trading and I think it's a good job. But, you know, I don't think we should have a situation where these guys are getting paid tons and other people are struggling even though they're working really hard.
I think there is a difference in trading in shares. You are trading value in some company for something and you are trading in futures. There is something in it. There is a value. An intelligent placement will bring more money, etc. But currency trading is just to sit on the side and milk the system.
Yeah, well, I suppose so. But I mean, when you go on holiday, you're probably going to buy some euros or some Thai baht or something. And then, you know, if there's no currency traders, you're going to struggle to get that. So ultimately, you probably do need that stuff.
But I liked very much what you have said about the inequality and what perhaps we can do. And I wish it would happen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
So probably one final question, unless anyone's got one, please just let me know on the chat that you want to ask something, and I'll let you go ahead. So Gary, is there any sort of a country or economy outside of the UK that you see a more equal society and one that you think the UK should sort of aspire to sort of mirror? Or do you think the best way forward is to reinvent ourselves as a new economy, especially now that we're leaving the European Union? People have said that we've got an opportunity to.
Well, the data on inequality tends to show that inequality is rising relatively quickly on a historic perspective. Different sources will tell you different things, but especially if we look at wealth inequality rather than income inequality. In a variety of countries, even the countries which have more of a historic reputation for being more equal, such as the Scandinavian countries. Japan has a somewhat more equal economy, depending on how we look at it. It's more generation inequality rather than sort of rich family, poor family, class inequality. I spent a lot of time in Japan, so that's an economy that I know a bit better. You know, it has lower inequality on a lot of measures than the UK does, but it still does have growing inequality. It has some of the same problems that we have in the UK, such as it's very difficult often for young people to get decent wages or to afford decent housing. It has this big split between the cities and the countryside. But I think the lower inequality is helping the economic situation there. But really, at the moment, from my perspective, the stance on inequality is basically everyone is charging forward together towards a more unequal society. So it's not obvious that we can find a solution elsewhere. We can look back to history and see more equal societies, especially in Europe in 30 years after the Second World War. And we can look at the problems that caused and how to deal with it. But personally, I think it's best to look at the situation we're in now, try to understand what's happening and how to fix it. If you are convinced, you know, you can go read my website, wealtheconomics.org. If you're convinced inequality is a problem, then we need to find a way to fix it that's going to work now. You know, in the 30 years after the Second World War, we had a lot less capital movement. It was not so easy for the rich to move to another country, take their wealth to another country, take their income to another country. So the tax system that we bring in now has to be one that works in the situation that we have now. It will help if we have economic cooperation between countries. So, I'm always keen to talk to people from other countries, movements from other countries, about trying to make this something that we do across the board. I mean, especially now with this coronavirus, we have such an opportunity, because the same thing is going to happen everywhere. The same thing is going to happen all across Europe. It's going to happen in the US. It's going to happen all across the rich world. The situation in the poor world, I'm not an expert on that, but it could be terrible. But we're going to have the same problems happen all across the rich world, which is the rich get richer, the job market is terrible, wages go down, houses become less affordable. So I think if we could establish some level of international cooperation, and we probably won't get a better chance than this, we could really achieve something in bringing in systems that force the rich to pay tax and stop it from being avoided. But really, I try to be a pragmatist as much as possible. It needs to be something that works. So if we could get international cooperation, that would be great. Unfortunately, at the moment, I don't see it happening meaningfully anyway. So in a sense, that's an opportunity, because we can build a movement internationally, really, for people who understand this is important. And then we can find a way to tax the rich that they can't avoid, which is the big challenge.
Thank you. I think, so just to end on one last big, huge discussion topic, Brexit, you in or out?
I'm not an expert on Brexit. I wish I was. I hope it goes well. That's all I can say. But there's people more knowledgeable than me who can tell you what's going to happen on Brexit. It's not an area that I'm particularly expert on. Sorry.
But from an economic perspective, then, do you think it's a big disaster, or do you think it
could be a disaster? If it goes badly, it could be a disaster. I hope that it doesn't go badly. I hope that's not a disaster, because obviously I live here. I've got lots of friends here, and I don't want it to be a disaster. I think if it's managed sensibly, it doesn't have to be a disaster. It probably will cause some, everybody expects it to cause negative economic consequences, at the very least in the short term, if not in the long term. But if people decide that's a price they're willing to pay for some other kind of benefit, then that's their choice to make. I'm an economist. You're not going to find many economists who tell you Brexit is going to be good for the economy. I don't expect it to be good for the economy, but I don't think it has to be a disaster, and I hope that it's not.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving up your time this evening to talk to us, and thank you everyone for joining us and listening and participating. If you didn't get the hint, the website is what is it one more time, Gary?
It's wealtheconomics.org, or you can add me on Twitter, Gary's Economics, and also I'll be putting some videos on YouTube soon, Gary's Economics.
Absolutely, simplifying economics for us all.
Yeah, the probably easiest thing, if you add my Twitter, everything's linked there, Gary's Economics.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And we have recorded this, so if anyone is desperate to share the talk with any of their friends, and just please just ask for it. I'll pass it on.
Thanks, Zeus, for your work.
No problem to all. Good evening and good night.
So it's intentionally designed, national insurance, so that very rich people pay a very low percent. Wealth inequality pushes house prices up. Money printing pushes house prices up, so house prices go through the roof. But at the same time, wealth inequality pushes wages down.